And this is our disaster plan version 1. As we all know, disaster preparedness in Queensland is important because being prepared is the best way that we can keep everyone safe. If you haven't heard of Birdie's Tree before, that poster's from Birdie's Tree, which is a program for children that's been designed in Queensland by Andrea, and is a fantastic program for children around preparedness, especially for children in all types of areas. Sorry, let's see whether this is going to forward, and it's not forwarding. Oh, here we go. Yes, so as we said before, Community Plus acknowledges the resilience and sovereignty of the Jagera and Turrbal people and their custodianship and connection to country, including the meandering Maiwa River, and we pay respect to elders past and present and anyone on the presentation today. About us, Community Plus has been part of building resilience across Brisbane Inner South since 2011 and previously across our community since the 70s. Yeronga Community Centre, which our organisation runs 3 neighbourhood centres, Annerley, West End and Yeronga, and Yeronga Community Centre was founded from grassroots advocacy, response and recovery from the 2011 floods. As community, we've put in lots of submissions over the last few years around the inquiries that were around things, and this is one of the quotes from our submission to the flood inquiry, was that we need to help communities become more self-reliant and resilient in the face of more frequent severe weather events, and we must invest in building local community capacity for place-based centre preparedness, response and recovery, speaking to the converted here. I'm just going to show a video, a couple of minutes of a video. So Resilient Kurilpa is a group that we were part of, we are still part of. It is a grant that we got through flexible funding through the Queensland Government. And this is the trigger film around preparing apartment blocks during the floods. And so I'm just going to play a couple of minutes of this because it's really important for us to understand that we all think that government is looking at that. So
when we build or when we buy into a community, into a building, we probably assume that, you know, the governments, the councils, the developers have all done.
Oh, what's going on? Sorry. No. Sorry. I'll press something. Has that got sound? Just hold on. Let me try sound again.
They've built these buildings or prepared these areas, opened up this land for availability. We assume that they develop properties on areas that are not going to be affected by previous events that they've seen. And that they also have those plans in place. You know, what are the disaster plans for an event like a flood? Yes, there's a certain amount of government, state, federal, local planning that exists, but that's not going to cut it down to the site-specific level of communities. We do need to be more engaged about preparing ourselves for what affects us, not just the broad picture of, you know, evacuate or leave.
And interestingly, if you look at the 1931 flood map, which is a flood that's not talked about a lot, or the 1974 flood map, the overlays are the same. It's really interesting. I've actually gone through the exercise of putting 1893 and all of the stacking them all up. And the footprint of the flood grows, but it never really changes. If you're in a floodplain and you're in a low-lying area, that's where the flood's going to go. So it is a very interesting exercise historically to look at where that flood path is.
We're standing at quite an important piece of infrastructure for the building that I live in. We use timestamp photographs to identify what the levels were here as the flood took place. And because this level here has become such an important known point for us, we've actually created our own flood gauge. These are important to where we live here at River Point, because at this point here, which is 4 metres, Energex cut the power to 2 of our transformers. At 4.5, at this point here, our basement is starting to go underwater. Where we're standing is only about a metre above high water mark. And 5.4, which is about as far as I can reach, is the level that the 2022 flood got to.
So that shows us that we all think that governments are ready for that, but as we've seen with Adrian from Resilient Kurupa, is that they're even putting sticky tape on buildings. And so part of our work is working under the Sendai framework. So on the screen, you'll see the Sendai framework on the left-hand side. That's the United Nations disaster strategy, their framework that they work across. So neighbourhood centres across Queensland, we all work in all of those areas about, understanding our disaster risk, strengthening the risk of governance, enhancing our preparedness and investing. And that's what we have to be doing. We have been petitioning with Neighbourhood Centres Queensland about that, investing in resilience programs. As Tanya said, they don't have a resilience person in their community, but that's really important that we're working to advocate for that, especially in areas that are high prone to disasters. This is a local, the Queensland Disaster Management Arrangements, with many of you would be aware. Brisbane, we have a local disaster management group. The human and social subgroup has no one from neighbourhood centres in that, even though we have 27 neighbourhood centres that are in our community. But Neighbourhood Centres Queensland and us and Sandy Allen and I have been to see the Lord Mayor just recently about petitioning them to include us in there. As we were just, Natasha was just talking about the strategy for disaster resilience. That's a really important part for our organisation, to be referring to that. And every time we talk to politicians and other people, we're always taking a copy of the disaster strategy so that it's an overall guideline for our centres working with the strategy. We're not just, pretending that we know what we're talking about with Neighbourhood Centres Queensland, and it's a great document. If you haven't read it, it's fantastic information. So our disaster plan, Community Plus, continues to look forward into preparedness both for ourselves and community. The disaster plan for Community Plus is the first time our organisation is documenting how we want to do things in a prepared manner, not reactive at the time of the disaster. We want to know how are we ready? What do we know? How do we know what the right thing is to do? Who does what? How does everybody's voice, community, staff, volunteers' voice matter in the process? And how is the community involved? At all times, we work under a community development framework at our organisation, and we want to ensure that this plan is owned by everyone. It's the first draft that has come out. As I said, Community Plus has worked across all different areas over the last 2 years to 3 years nearly now around building resilience in our community. So this is the next piece for us. We've been helping everybody in our community raise resilience of their homes through Resilient Homes Fund, building it through different activities that we've been running. But for us, it's about the next piece of the puzzle, and that's our disaster plan. So I'm going to share the disaster plan. Hopefully I can share this screen because it did not go as successful yesterday afternoon. Can you see the disaster plan on the screen now? So this is our disaster plan. I was looking at the continuity plan that was developed by CIA, and looking at all different plans that I could find for disaster preparedness, for a plan for a community centre. We didn't want the overall kind of what we would do if we couldn't work here. What we were looking at is how we're supporting our community if a disaster happens in our community. It wasn't about if we had a fire or something happened in our community. We wanted to make sure that we were ready so that our staff knew. I've worked here since 2011 and I worked through the 22 floods, and I remember our manager coming to me saying, okay, what do we do? And so this document for us is so that all the information that's been in my head for years is down on paper, and so that our organisation can be prepared for that. So we gathered all different information from all different areas to make this document. And so this is version 1. We And we're going to make this available for everybody to use. We don't want to hold the IP of this. We're going to make a Word document available for everybody to do. So the document goes through around disaster triggers and how that's going to happen for our organisation. So we do have a standing offer arrangement, but as we know, as I was talking to Natasha, not always are they enacted. So normally what happens when a disaster is declared, the Lord Mayor declares the disaster, which then goes to community recovery, which then goes through to the federal government, and you know the triggers are of who helps with what is there. So for us, you know, our recovery hubs at Yeronga and West End would open if the Lord Mayor declared a disaster in our area, or if we had rainfall and flooding that was, or fires or storms, and we're riding in heat wave in ours as well. So we're going through and talking to our staff around what their role is in the plan, because lots of times, especially in 22, we had people in our team that were really busy doing the doing, and they were the people that were getting asked all the questions. So we've kind of separated it up, and that we have different roles for people. It can be exactly the same person. We know not all centres have lots of staff that can do that, but it gives a guideline of, so people know who is doing what. So we have a disaster recovery and resilience coordinator, which at the moment is me, but we only have funding for me until the end of the year. And so that, you know, our organisation is looking long term as well. We have our manager as a communications lead. We have our admin person is the logistics lead. We have a volunteer. One of our staff looks after the volunteers as well. And we run the Q Stars program. So we have a Q Stars lead because we, in 22, we provided renters with information on how they could be supported during flood, and so that they knew what their rights were. So we had a worker that worked in the centre every day to be able to give renters their information. So for us, that's a really important part that we learnt from 22, that we want to make sure that people, you know, that we've got a roster of staff and we know where people are located. So then we go through and we have the roles and responsibilities. What do those people do? Who do they contact when it's activated? So even down to, you know, that they're contacting Metro South Mental Health Team, you know, putting posters up in the centre, contacting Oz Harvest. We have a large, a strong relationship with Oz Harvest. They're actually in our centre right now doing some work for Suncorp Bank around some videos. So we know that they will provide us resources. They did. We were one of the only centres open that were taking things from Oz Harvest during the floods of 22. The volunteer lead would call out to people who we have a spontaneous volunteer program, and we've just started the Wallaby program, which is getting people registered so they can register, like you were saying, Tanya, around your care crew, around people who might not want to volunteer day to day in our centre, but when a disaster happens in our community, we want them to be there. So we've got, you know, numbers of, you know, contacting MPs and councillors and putting information up online and bringing staff back in. That's going to be our biggest issue for us, is if it happens on the weekend, we don't have funding. You know, we're all like you all, you know, our funding is limited. So to call people back in on weekends, or if they're on holidays, how do we do that around HR and that? So that's the next piece we're working on. So we've gone through and put in disaster recovery, like all the position descriptions. So when we're looking in the future for new people for those roles, this will form part of, you know, what we need to have all the time in our PDs for our organisation. So we pulled all of those information in. It says, just talks about them, and I'll send this document out to everyone. So it talks, you know, about. So then we get into preparing for disasters for our centre. And like Natasha said, with Mount Isa, you know, buying things to be ready. Our two major supermarkets in our area, I know we live in metropolitan Brisbane, but the two supermarkets that are our closest ones to our centre, both flood. And so we have to be prepared that we can't say, well, we're going to send our people out So we're even getting down to where we have prepared packs for ourselves so that if an event happens, people don't have to go out and buy things. We were scrambling last time to go, oh, where's a blanket? Where's some phone chargers? Sending people off to shops to buy things at the time. We have showers in our building as well. And so, even things in hard copy, because we know the internet goes down and we know the power can go out as well. So having things ready in hard copy, signage and everything to go up. We have a standing offer arrangement with Masters Hire around hiring coal rooms and generators if we need to do that. And it's different at both of our centres. The centre at Yeronga is a brand new centre that was built in 23, and so it is different to our community house at West End, which is a smaller centre. But just making sure that everybody has everything, even things down to like portable fans that are rechargeable. We have purchased them so that, if the power does go out, that we're not, people aren't working in that. So we've got comms plans around what we have already in, we use Canva, and so all those things are in Canva ready to go. So the staff don't have to go, oh, I have to make a poster to go up on the wall that says we're open from this time to this time. Those things are all ready to go, and you just have to insert the documents in there. One of the main parts that we're working on is supporting the supporter. For us, our staff and our volunteers are the most important part of that. In 2022, the CD support worker and myself, I was a CD worker at Yeronga at the time, we worked 16 hours straight. We were working 13 hours a day, and we worked that. It nearly killed us. And we had there was only the 2 staff in the building at the time. It was just after COVID, as we all know. And for us, that really shone a light on that we need to be prepared. Where can we get other staff from? We were so lucky that Kyabra rang us, which is a local neighbourhood centre, and said, we've got staff here that are not doing something because they can't go out and do their normal activities. Would you like us to come there? And so that was unbelievable for us. We were able to have a lunch break. We were able to go home earlier. And, you didn't have to answer the phones as well as deal with all the people that were coming in, which was hundreds of people every day coming into our centre. So we have an EAP, Employer Assistance Program, but we also have a program with Metro South Mental Health Team around the support that we've got through them, through the Queensland Government. There's disaster funding for them all over the state now, which is a great program. So what we do and don't accept in donations, that was one of the biggest things that we found in 22. Some people would say, yeah, bring everything in. And I was going, no, we don't want anything. And so we all know when a disaster hits, the last thing we want is a bunch of junk. And really, no one needs a winter coat when it's February, when it's flooding. We all have, hopefully all have used Give It. And that for us was the portal that we were like, if you want to give stuff, put it up on Give It. But we don't want it. So we want, staff to know exactly what we do and don't do, and that we would have signs that says that so they don't feel like that they're being the nasty person at the beginning. So it's consistent across our centres too, because we have softer people and harder people in our centres, and so it just gives that real guideline around that. Spontaneous volunteering. In 2022, we had over 200 volunteers volunteer in the first 2 weeks. They were people that were coming to the centre and helping us prepare food, going out, taking the food out to people's homes while they were cleaning up. We didn't do the cleanup in people's homes, only if people had contacted us and we knew, that there was a few people that came to us, but really they were just individuals that were doing that. So also preparing for recovery, that we're not just thinking about what we're doing, preparing for the disaster, and while the disaster's on, we're looking at that and making people aware that, we go through the heroic stage, the honeymoon, where people are just exhausted. you know, everyone seems to go away and people feel like they get left after a few weeks. It's like, okay, the next disaster's happened, we've moved on. But we all know that our community, like we're still helping people get back in their homes. And next week it's 3 years since the disaster. We have some people that are still living in rental properties, living with friends and family. So we all know that that takes a long time. So we want people to be aware of that, especially new staff, that it just doesn't, just because the recovery hub closes doesn't mean that the recovery of our community is finished. So we go through and we put in information so that new staff understand where you can get information from. We work extensively with Brisbane City Council, City Resilience team they come to all of our events and talk about the emergency dashboard. So making staff aware. We actually did sent out an email when all the storms were coming a few weeks ago, when there was hail, and no one, like lots of our stuff, we were like, do you know where to get this information from? And put the dashboard up, and people were like, I didn't even know that that existed. So, you know, sometimes we think people know because we know, but it's not always that. So then we go through and we list all the organisations that we work with, so that we have contact names and numbers of people from all, you know, from Queensland Police, SES, City Resilience teams, and then other organisations that we work with. So we've got this filled in ours, and around, you know, who from Community Recovery is the person we talk to, Disaster Relief Australia, Australian Business Volunteers, Neighbourhood Centres Queensland, of course. And we have the Brisbane Neighbourhood Centres Disaster Network that we're part of across Brisbane. Then we go into like really detailed information about our floor plans at our centre. So no one has to guess where the tea and coffee is going to be, where the bins need to be. You can give this to a volunteer and they could set up the centre straight away. What this showed us is when we went to do the one at our West End Community House, it is really not fit for purpose for a recovery hub. It is upstairs, downstairs. It has limited disability access to the backyard. And so the services were upstairs and downstairs. So for us, we're looking at somewhere else in our community. In 2011, the West End Community House was not available for access for 11 weeks. And so we've got to think about if that street floods coming in, this house is safe, but the community centre isn't. And that's what this disaster plan has raised for us, is that it's not fit for purpose. So we have to look at other facilities across our organisation, and it gives us a chance to talk to Community Recovery and the Queensland Government about, you know, where we are. So even around, you know, where the dirty dishes go and stuff, we just want people to know exactly where it is. So, but, you know, it's chaotic when you're opening up a recovery hub in the beginning. And the last thing we want to do is people be arguing about where the coffee is going to be served. And so we've gone through, we're lucky enough that we've got some great stuff around that. And you know what, we have a large multi-purpose room. And people may think, oh, well, we'll just set up everything inside. But when we were open up as a community recovery hub, we had Services Australia, Red Cross, Community Recovery. We had 25 staff in our building. And we actually didn't get notified that they were coming. We had asked for us to be that. And they said, no, we're not going to go to you. We're going to go and hire a hall. And then next minute, Services Australia was at our door and said, we're setting up here. And so we were glad that they set up there. But for us, that was, you know, we weren't prepared. We had an art activity that day. And so it was interesting to do that. So, so we're basing it on evidence-based around prevention, preparedness, response and recovery, and all the time just trying to help our staff understand that this just isn't us going, you know, it sounds like a good idea, let's do that. And we'll be taking this document out to, you know, our community and our co-locators. We have some groups that are co-located in our building, and finding, you know, asking them how this works for them as well. So as we said, funding is always the very interesting piece for us. In 2011, we I was just a community member. We ran a recovery hub for 6 months with no funding. We never got a cent from the government for 6 months, and then we said we were going to close, and they told us we couldn't. And we said, you can't tell us what to do. You don't give us any money. If you give us some money, you might be able to do that. So for us, you know, the funding stream is really important, because we all know it puts pressure on a community that, you know, is going to take a long time to recover. So we're looking at state arrangements, talking to local, state, community recovery around, you know, we have an SOA, but if it's not enacted, you know, like what we need. So we're doing a budget we're doing the Rolls-Royce budget, and we're doing the mini minor budget. So it's around, you know, being really clear to them if they come to us and want us to open up something, what we can and cannot do. Because we all know that they want more than their piece with it. So we just have important documents, making sure that people are aware. I've been doing some work with the students that we have around making sure that they know that these documents exist, because they're the next generation of community development workers. And so we want them to be able to go and look for those documents all the time. So I'm going to stop sharing that bit. Sorry. And go back to the other bit. Hopefully that closes. And yeah, so that's me. I'm Melinda, and if you'd like to contact me, I'm happy for anyone. And we're going to make this document available. I'm going to provide it to Natasha to put up on the NCQ as a Word document, so that people can just go in and do the information. We've been very fortunate with Resilient Kooraga. That's been the piece with we were doing with the apartment blocks, and they made their template available to anyone that wanted to use the apartment template, and it's been used. It's over 4,000 apartments that are using, you know, single dwelling apartments, and the body corporates of those are using that template. And Community Plus has seen that that's been a great tool to share. Why are we just all inventing the same thing? We're all doing the same work. Let's just share documents that we have.